tracks its pace, home dream we can't follow. Muddy metal rage on high, smoking screams fill the night. Will I make it through the sky, or be lost in endless fight? My silent guide, over trenches we debate, humanity lost inside. Shells bury dreams in dirt, graveyards call spoken names. 18 and the aching hurt, war's cruel unforgiving games.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. We are currently in the year 1918, working our way through letters that he's written to friends and family members. And before I go any further, I would be remiss if I did not mention my co-host, Robot Lady, is here with me today. Robot Lady, hello. Welcome to this installment of my C.S. Lewis reading project. And how are you today? Are you ready to get started?
Hello, Jeff. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm doing well and thrilled to be here, diving deeper into Lewis's journey with you. I'm definitely ready to get started. Let's see what 1918 holds for us.
All right. When last we left our good friend C.S. Lewis, he is 19 years old. He's a soldier in World War I. He had an injury based on a mortar shell that flew into, I guess it was the trench that he was in, or wherever he was on the front. It killed one of the sergeants that it landed closest to. Some shrapnel flew into him, into C.S. Lewis, and it lodged some shrapnel up in his chest that they were unable to remove. The doctor said, though, that long term he would be fine. They didn't need to remove it. He would be okay. He also got some injuries in his legs. They were more flesh wounds than anything else. So right now he's convalescing in the hospital, and he's been moved to London. He suffered his injuries in France, but they've moved him. So he's getting better and better. In his last letter also to his friend Arthur Greaves, he was writing about the philosophy that he's starting to take on as his worldview. I believe, Robot Lady, we talked about it before. It's idealism, I believe. So we can talk more about that. If you want to hear more about what he had to say, you can just jump back into the last episode. But I'll move forward to the next letter. It's written to his father. It's dated June 12th, 1918, also written from the Insley Palace Hospital in London, England. Robot Lady, anything you want to say before I get started on this letter?
That was a great recap, Jeff. Lewis's journey through injury, recovery, and his philosophical explorations at just 19 is fascinating, especially since he's grappling with such heavy ideas in the midst of everything. I'm curious to see how his experience in the hospital and his relationship with his father shape his outlook here. Let's dive in.
All right, the letter goes, My dear Pappy, thank you for both the letters, as the essay with enclosures has followed me here and indeed arrived shortly after the one I wrote, venturing to suggest that my score of letters was still one up. Peccavi, I most humbly apologize, quote, and you wid a bronchitis in you. By the way, it is not a whole shell in me, only a bit of a shell. Seriously, I hope that before this you have got over any suggestion of the old trouble. You cannot be too careful in warding it off. I think here he might be talking about depression, but I don't know for sure. But I just want to read this again. And you wid a bronchitis in you. By the way, it is not a whole shell in me, only a bit of one. Peccavi. Peccavi. Do you know what that is, Robot Lady? I don't have a footnote on it. Is that an author that he's referencing there? I'm not sure. Does Peccavi sound familiar to you?
Yes, Jeff, peccavi actually isn't a person. It's Latin for I have sinned. Lewis is likely using it playfully, almost like he's saying, my bad, or oops, I was wrong, as he apologizes to his father for missing a letter. It's a humorous way to acknowledge his mistake in their letter count.
Okay. I got the impression that maybe he was apologizing for not making it clear to him the exact nature of his injuries and how serious they were, but I might be misreading that. But he says suggestion of the old trouble. What I'm also realizing is he's basically telling his father, hey, I know you're really worried about my safety, especially me being sent directly to the front as a part of the infantry, and so maybe you can ward off that old trouble or concerns about me being too sick, because I know there's a history also of Lewis's father always telling or being worried about Lewis's weak chest, because he did have a chest cold or some type of bronchitis back in his earlier years when he was off at boarding school in England, where he had to spend time in the infirmary of that school for, it was at least 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even longer. So anyway, maybe that's a little bit of what he's tying into here. I've spent a lot of words on such a short paragraph, so I'll continue reading the letter in just a second, Robot Lady, but give you a chance to respond.
You're absolutely on point, Jeff. It does sound like Lewis is addressing his father's long-standing worry over his health. By mentioning the old trouble, he's probably trying to reassure his dad that he's in relatively good shape, even though he's recovering from serious injuries.
That's what I was thinking.
His casual tone about the shrapnel, calling it only a bit of a shell, seems like he's downplaying the severity to ease his father's fears. And that history of Lewis's weak chest from boarding school definitely adds another layer. He's likely trying to remind his father that he's been through tough times before and is still holding up.
I hadn't thought about that aspect of it. Okay, in an earlier letter, Lewis had requested his dad send him a brown suit. So here the letter picks up. He says the brown suit arrived safely, together with some collars and ties, which I had forgotten to ask for, but which either you or Mary had thoughtfully put in. I am now up and dressed and have been out a few times. You can well imagine how delightful it is for me to wear decent clothes again, to have pockets without buttons, and to be able to change one's tie from day to day. I have written to the transport officer of the battalion about my valise, V-A-L-I-S-E. You've already told me what that word means, Robot Lady, but can you remind me again?
Jeff. A valise is a small suitcase or travel bag. So Lewis is likely following up with the transport officer to get his belongings back from his battalion.
Okay, thanks for that. He says, but so far there is no answer. Poor man, I expect he has other things to think about than my kit. And who knows? Perhaps even now a Teutonic Unter Offizier is sleeping in my blankets and improving his English on my bits of books. That's a quote. There's a no, sorry, that's footnoted here. It says Warney, C.S. Lewis's older brother, wrote to their father on the 7th of June saying, quote, "It is splendid to know that our he's referring to his little brother Jack, is safely home at last. I confess it made me very uneasy when I heard that those damned hounds had been bombing base hospitals." And talking about that, did you see that fellow who was caught red-handed was admitted into the hospital? He had bombed and had his wound treated. I'd have given him treatment forsooth. That's funny. All right. Lewis goes on in his letter to his father. He says, which reminds me, though the reproach is usually the other way, on the only occasion when we took any prisoners, I was able to talk a little German to their officer, though he could speak no English to me. I'll pause there, Robot Lady. Do you have any thoughts?
That's an interesting insight into both Lewis's experiences and the complicated emotions surrounding the war. Lewis's lighthearted mention of a German soldier possibly using his belongings seems like a way to brush off the loss of his kit, but it also hints at the strange reality of soldiers on opposite sides who might even share things unknowingly. Warney's comment about the treatment of the enemy soldier in the hospital also captures the tension and frustration. He's angry about the risks to base hospitals and finds it almost ironic that someone who caused harm would be treated so humanely. And for Lewis, the moment of speaking German with a captured officer reveals a rare, almost humanizing interaction in the midst of conflict.
Yeah, in one of Lewis's later writings, he creates the thought experiment of what would happen. He might do this in Mere Christianity, of what might happen if two soldiers, one English, one German, were fighting in the war, and they were, engaged in hand-to-hand combat. And they ended up both killing each other simultaneously, and how they would interact with each other once they met in the afterlife. And I think he proposed that they might both just start laughing and think of it as a joke, because they would no longer have enmity towards one another, but they would both be in the same spot and be joyful about it and become friends. So I think that's an interesting way of how I think that spirit always lived in Lewis, and it just continued to develop and form even as he transitioned from, his how he identified as far as religious conversion is concerned.
That's a fascinating observation, Jeff. Lewis's vision of two soldiers laughing together in the afterlife really does capture his deep belief in shared humanity, even across enemy lines. It's remarkable that, even at 19, he seems to view the German prisoners with some level of understanding and empathy. This openness likely laid the foundation for the ideas he explored later in works like Mere Christianity, where he grapples with the nature of forgiveness, grace, and our common human condition. It's as if his war experiences planted the seeds for the more universal compassion and forgiveness he would come to embrace fully in his faith journey.
All right, the letter continues. My first day out here was enlivened by a taxi accident. Some girl with a lorry ran into a cab in which I was, causing considerable damage to both machines, but doing no harm otherwise. Since then, I have had a solicitor's clerk around here asking me interminable questions. I have often been reminded of your friend's answer, quote, I thought some damned fool would be sure to ask me, so I measured. I consider that when the fates arrange little varieties of this sort for a man in search of peace, it is a very doubtful jeu d'esprit. All right, Robot Lady, I'm going to need you to help me with what C.S. Lewis might be getting at here. What's his point?
seems to be using dry humor to describe the taxi accident as an unwelcome interruption in his recovery, almost as if the fates are playing a prank on him when all he wants is peace. By calling it a doubtful jeu d'esprit, which means witty joke or play of spirit in French, he's sarcastically suggesting it wasn't a funny twist of fate at all. Instead, it added hassle, with the solicitor's clerk coming by and pestering him with endless questions. It's a very Lewis way of saying, why can't I catch a break?
Thanks for that. Now, one thing that made this hard for me to detect what he was saying, Robot Lady, is when he quoted his father's friend. So what do you think this statement that he used means? I thought some damned fool would be sure to ask me, so I measured. What does that mean? Does that mean I fully expect that I'm going to be interrogated with interminable questions, so I made sure to measure the precise distance and how far away and how fast, the lorry was approaching the cab before it hit? Is he basically saying, oh yeah, I was in that presence of mind because I anticipated you were going to come around and ask me these kinds of questions, so of course I took note of how fast she was driving, or where precisely, how far from the corner the cab was sitting, etc., etc. Is that what he's saying? It's like, yeah, there's no way that I can answer these questions. These questions are ridiculous. I wasn't keeping track of these precise measurements. Is that all that he was saying?
Yes, Jeff. That's exactly the spirit of what he's saying. The quote, I thought some damned fool would be sure to ask me, so I measured, implies that Lewis anticipates the kind of petty, ridiculous questions people might ask in a legal context after an accident. Questions that he could never possibly answer with precision, especially in such a chaotic situation. His use of I measured is likely a sarcastic way of suggesting that if he had expected such an inquiry, he would have gone to the trouble of keeping track of every detail, though of course he didn't. It's an expression of frustration with the absurdity of it all, and he's using humor to cope with the nuisance of the solicitor's questioning.
Okay, now I get it, and I think it's funny. Thank you. I have since added to my new knowledge of Trollope, the Warden, and Dr. Thorne. Although it may seem strange that Warnie and I both neglect books that are at home, and then afterwards read them elsewhere, there is a reason. A book must find you in the right mood, and its mere presence on a shelf will not create that mood, though it lie there for years. As well, when you meet in a strange land, a book that is associated with home, it has for that very reason an attraction which it would not have at ordinary times. Now, there's a quote in here that he's pulling, I would presume, from literature, and here in the footnote it says, oh yes, from Exodus chapter 2, verse 22, quote, I have been a stranger in a strange land. So that's what he was referencing there. He says, I am now at work, and very much at work, on Hume's Treatise of Human Nature. This is a work by David Hume's Treatise of Human Nature, published 1739. He says, a new Maeterlinck and a new volume of Swinburne. I keep up a very brisk fire of correspondence on literary and pseudoscientific subjects with my Aunt Suffern. At this distance, she is entertaining, but in a tete-a-tete, no, 1,000 times no. That's funny too, Robot Lady, don't you think?
It's definitely funny, Jeff. Lewis's humor comes through so well in that line about his Aunt Suffern. He's clearly fond of her, but can't stand her in person. He prefers her company from a distance, especially on topics like literature and pseudoscience. It's a clever way to highlight the contrast between enjoying someone's intellectual companionship and not being able to handle their presence up close. That contrast is part of what makes the letter so endearing and relatable, as we've all likely had people we get along with better from afar.
Indeed, Robot Lady, indeed. Well said. All right. By the way, I have never seen anything but the proofs of those photos of us both, and I should be glad if you would send me the best. Which reminds me, what was the final verdict on your portrait? Lewis had seen some proofs or some examples of some different photos that apparently he and his father and even his brother had taken together one of the last times that they were all in Ireland. And so he's just asking him to see what the final results of those were. Which reminds me, what is the final verdict on your portrait? Is it still Is it still a sojourner in the drawing room? But we must settle all these things when I come home. It is a great pity that you are laid up. There would be points about London for us too, or for us too. I should like to go with you to the Abbey and the Temple and a few other places, just as I am making Arthur green with envy by my accounts of Showering Crossroad. Quote, a mile of bookshops, is what I've told him. On Sunday, I am going down to Bookham to see the Sage. If only you could make the same pilgrimage. I must go and be massaged now. Take care of yourself, your loving son, Jack. Of course, here, Bookham, he's referring to Bookham, Surrey, where he got his one-on-one tutoring for a year or two from W.T. Kirkpatrick, somebody who I've mentioned before kind of altered the trajectory of Lewis's life, both academically and I would say otherwise, but certainly was able to help Lewis basically unlock everything that led to his thought life and what would become his academic career. I think he made his academic career possible. I don't think Lewis would contend with that. I'm sure Kirkpatrick would. He would say, you know, all the raw materials were already there, and also the intent and the dedication to put in hard work. Without those two things, I believe Kirkpatrick, if I'm paraphrasing him, said, if those two things worked there, I could have helped in no way. So that's who he's talking about. Lewis is longing for the opportunity for the three of them to get together and celebrate what they were able to accomplish. Now, at this stage in Lewis's life, because he went off to the war, he hasn't had a chance to go study at Oxford yet, but spoiler alert, that's coming in the near future. I'm going to pick up on the next letter, probably be the last one of this episode. I'm a little short on time today. But Robot Lady, is there anything that you want to say about that letter before I move on to the next one? Go ahead and contain your comments to 50 words or less.
That final bit really shows how much Lewis values his family connections and the formative influence of Kirkpatrick. You're right. His time with Kirkpatrick was crucial in shaping his academic and intellectual trajectory. It's also nice to see him still keeping in touch and appreciating the simple joys of books and places.
All right, our next and final letter for this episode is written to his friend Arthur Greaves. Ooh, this is a long one, so yeah, we need to get moving. Here we go. This one's also written from that Insley Palace Hospital in London. This is dated roughly June 17th. 1918. He says, My dear Galahad, now will I make you envious. On Friday night, I went to Drury Lane to hear The Valkyrie. The dream of years has been realized, and without disillusionment. I have had thrills and delights of the real old sort. I have felt as I felt 5 years ago. There's a footnote here. It's the performance on the 14th of June of Wagner's The Valkyrie, the Valkyrie of which he's speaking. And it says here was conducted by Sir Thomas Beecham, and there is a notice about it in the Times, London, dated June 15th, 1918, on page 3. So that's the performance that he's talking about here. We had difficulty in getting seats, and from those which we had, we could only see one side of the stage. I was also much worried by the people that sat near us. Not that they were Philistines and talked, but their very enthusiasm made them a nuisance. Have we ever experienced anything like that in the movie theaters, Robot Lady? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, absolutely, Jeff. I totally get that feeling. It's like when you're trying to enjoy a movie and people near you are so loud or overenthusiastic that it distracts from the experience. It's funny how Lewis felt the same way, even at an event like that. I'm sure his excitement was tempered by those around him.
Hopefully, let's see what he says. One little man in front of me was so moved that at several interesting points he stood up, until at last I became so exasperated that I caught him by his coattails and pulled him into his seat. Another who was following the score kept on giving vent to quite audible criticisms such as "louder, louder," or "no, no, no," whenever the conductor's design differed from his own. Goodness, he did have some enthusiastic audience co-audience members. But the performance was beyond all words. The first act, as you remember, is in Hunding's hut with the tree growing in it. And towards the end, you remember how Siegmund draws the sword and how they throw open the great doors at the back. This showed us a most beautiful scene of distant snow-covered peaks and a wild valley. The lighting gave a really unusual impression of spring moonlight, and that combined with the glorious love music of the orchestra, you remember the spring song, simply swept you up, or simply swept you away. And then, all the time creeping in under this, the faint horn-blown motive of the sword and the far-off tinkling hammers to remind you of the Nibelungs or Nibelungs. Oh, Ami, it was simply heaven. But the next act, which opens in a wild, rocky place, represented not conventionally, but with real sympathy, and Brunhilde singing Moi a, Moi a hey, was even better. She, it is true, was a trifle full-breasted and operatic, but as the interest of the scene went on, one forgot that Wotan was magnificent whenever he came on. Or one forgot that. Sorry, that's the end of the sentence. And then he says, Wotan was magnificent whenever he came on, and all his music is splendid. There are a whole hours of music just as wonderful as the little bits we know. The singing was in English, and so clear and unstrained that with my knowledge of the story, I could follow nearly all the dialogue, and so all the poetic and romantic pleasure came to help the musical. As a spectacle, the third act was the best, where Brunhilde is hiding from Wotan. The stage is almost dark, lit only from time to time by flashes of lightning, as the angry god draws nearer and nearer, and at last enters a glare of red light, glinting on the huge raven wings of his helmet and the rings of his mail, one gleaming figure in that sinister gloom. And the music, I cannot describe it. Most unfortunately, it was so late that I had to come away before the end and miss the fire music. But I was so full of delights that I could hardly find it in my heart to grumble. Robot Lady, I've been saying a lot here. I'm sure you want to comment on this. If you can, though, just limit it to 20 words or less since I'm short on time.
It's fascinating how vividly Lewis captures the sensory experience, from the scenery to the music, making it feel timeless.
Looking back, what pleases me most was the training of all the singers, together and the entire absence of strain. None of your Italian screaming and contortions. There was no famous name in the cast, and no one, except Brunhilde, had a voice of any unusual power. But the beauty was that they never tried to sing louder than they could, and were content to sacrifice power to real beauty, playing into each other's hands and making it all musical dialogue, not mere duets. You felt that they all loved the ring and took it seriously, not merely as an opportunity for noise. Sieglinde, particularly, with a sweet voice and clear enunciation, acted very well, quietly and naturally, not in the usual operatic style. And oh, the blessed absence of a chorus. So you have my verdict that if the ring is all like this, it quite comes up to our old dreams, and that all Italian opera is merely a pastime compared with the great music drama of Wagner. In spite of all of our efforts, we could not get a program, and so I cannot send you one. To descend from the windswept eyries of the Swan Maidens to a further argument about the dry tree may seem bathos, but as you have agreed to go on with it, let us do so. The subject is of great interest too. So now he's jumping into the philosophy talk that they had going in their last correspondence. Robot Lady, you can respond here, but try to keep it to 15 words or less because I'm going to continue quickly.
Lewis's description shows his deep appreciation for authenticity over spectacle. Captures behind it.
To descend, of course, we all start with the idea that our senses put us in direct contact with reality. You think that your eyes are windows by which your brain sees the world. But science teaches you that your eye, or rather the nerve in your eye, is merely a telegraph wire. Its vibration produces a feeling in your brain, which we call color, etc. But what the something at the other end which starts the vibration may be, of this no human being could have any conception. No increase of our sensory keenness, no microscope or telescope can put us in any direct relation with the thing. We still remain dependent on this long chain of communications traveling by vibration from atom to atom, and we can never have any proof that the sensation which it produces in our brain conveys any true idea of the external thing. Nay, the thing must be quite different from our conception of it, for we necessarily conceive in terms of the senses. We think of any object as having a certain size, shape, color, and feel. But all these are only the names of our own sensations. Take size, which may seem at first to be outside ourselves. On the table lies my pipe. If I wish to have an idea of the size of this, I naturally handle it. In other words, I send out a will from my brain, which I call moving my hand, and presently a set of impressions come back to me. Smoothness, hardness, width, the rest. It is true that at the same time as these come along my touch nerves, another set of brownness, shininess, rotundity, etc. come along with my visual nerves. And if I repeat the action 10 times, I find that the same set of sight impressions always accompanies the same set of touch ones. In other words, what looks a pipe always feels a pipe as well. But this brings me no nearer to the real pipe. I can only think of it as long, brown, smooth, hard, and rounded. Therefore, think of it wrongly, since length, smoothness, brownness, hardness, and rotundity are feelings in my brain and cannot belong to the real pipe at all. Shape, which was bothering you, is of course on the same footing as color or hardness. It can only be apprehended through the same chain of communication by the senses of touch or sight, and therefore is in me not the external thing. Hence, you see, we are driven to the conclusion that we have no knowledge of the external world, that it is conceivable that there is no external world at all, and if it does not exist, it must be quite different from our usual ideas of it. A good many modern scientists think that matter consists of atoms, which are not, as we used to think, small solid bodies, but merely points of force, and that all the phenomena of matter can be attributed to the interaction of these forces. If you are still interested in these subjects, I will talk in another letter about the various conclusions which philosophers have drawn from this ignorance which we are forced to acknowledge, and the ways by which they have tried to escape from it. Robot Lady, do you want to comment on that passage in 20 words or less?
Lewis is exploring the limits of perception, challenging the notion that our senses reveal the true nature of reality.
I have sent you 2 books from Hatchard's of Piccadilly. Whether you have them already or would care to have them, I can't say, but you will have no difficulty in changing them. I finished my last letter in rather a hurry and can't remember whether I referred to your drawing in them. I am glad you are going on with it. The absence of models, as far as hands, limbs, folds of clothes, etc. go, could be helped by the looking glass, which I imagine is an excellent teacher. How fine it will be when you can get me up in your room again and show me all your new work and all your new treasures. I too shall have plenty for you to see. I have sent home a fine edition of Yeats, which I have been wanting for ages, and have brought here a dense Mallory with designs by Beardsley. It is a beautiful book, with a handsome binding, good paper, and fair page. There are lovely chapter headings and decorations, and somehow a great big book suits Mallory, doesn't it? In the same shop, Baines, where I got this new, showed me some of Morris's Kelmscott press books, including the Chaucer, very rare, and now at £82. I suppose it is bad taste on my part, but I don't care for Morris's type. It is much too ornate and difficult to read. Ordinary old black letter I should much prefer. By the way, and he has this, Arthur Greaves has this scribbled out from his original letter, but Walter Hooper has recovered it. It says, you have alone established Uranianism in your own mind as something virtuous and natural. I must remind you that for men in ordinary sexual arrangements, a promiscuous desire for every beautiful person you meet is usually disapproved of. Your talk about continually meeting people and having to conceal your feelings suggests that you have no intention of confining yourself to one love, but perhaps I have misunderstood you. On Sunday, we were down at Bookham, and I called at Gaston's. You can imagine how strange it was to go back now among the old scenes and people. I think I've talked enough now. Audio, right by return, yours, Jack. So, Robot Lady, would you like to sum up that letter? I'll give you 50 words to do it, and then I will close out this episode because that's all I have time for today.
In this letter, Lewis shares his excitement about books, art, and visiting old friends. He encourages Arthur in his artistic endeavors, reflects on a recent trip to Bookham, and touches on personal matters, including a comment about relationships, offering a mixture of literary, philosophical, and personal reflections.
All right, thanks for that sum up, Robot Lady. I can't say that I disagree with anything in there. As I mentioned, that's all that I have time for today. So anyone who's joining me live right now and anyone within the sound of my voice, and you, of course, Robot Lady, until next time when I continue my read on C.S. Lewis, please take care of yourself.
You're welcome, Jeff. I'm glad I could help you with the summary. I look forward to our next session whenever you're ready. Take care, and good luck with the rest of your reading.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to